$6,000 a year on food. That number climbs every single year, and the people who built their lives deep in the Appalachian Mountains never spent it. Stop buying what they never bought, because the mountain families of North Carolina, Tennessee, Virginia, West Virginia, and the Georgia Hill Country had a system, a closed and self-sufficient system that kept a family fed through every winter without a commercial supply chain. And at the center of that system sits one technique, a preservation method called leather britches, costing under $2 in materials, that was quietly set aside the moment electric refrigeration reached the rural South. There is one specific detail buried inside that technique, something about a single variety of bean that almost nobody outside those mountain communities ever learned. Most guides omit it entirely. That omission is why most attempts fail. Every part of it is coming, but not yet. The Bureau of Labor Statistics reported in 2024 that the average American household carries a grocery bill of $6,224 annually. The Environmental Protection Agency added in 2025 that $728 of that per person goes straight to food bought and never eaten. Those two numbers together describe a system engineered to extract money at every point of contact, and that system only became possible because an older, proven system was made to disappear. The Appalachian mountain communities had no reliable supply chain. Roads ran steep and narrow through the hills, and even when a family reached town, the money to spend there barely existed. Purchases stayed limited to items they genuinely could not produce: coffee, sugar, lamp oil, shoes. Everything else, they grew, preserved, and stored themselves. What they bought, they could count on one hand. What they never bought could fill a list of 26 items. This video works through that list. Before it reaches all 26, though, one technique near the top carries a specific detail, a single piece of knowledge about one particular bean variety that the mountain community passed hand to hand and never committed to any commercial publication. That detail is the reason the technique performs the way it does. Hold that thought. Here is where the story gets uncomfortable. The Appalachian families who never bought canned goods, never bought refrigeration, never purchased store soap, and never ordered seed from a commercial catalog were not living in deprivation. Root cellars held temperatures between 32 degrees and 40 degrees Fahrenheit year-round, without a single watt of electricity, drawing on nothing but the thermal mass of surrounding earth. Springhouses, small timber structures built directly over natural springs, exploiting that same principle of ground temperature stability, kept meat, dairy, and fruit at constant cool temperatures through every month of summer, doing the combined work of 3 modern appliances in one low building. Fermentation crocks turned salt and vegetables into food that lasted an entire winter, and according to the documented tradition, delivered immune and gut health benefits that no commercially canned equivalent has replicated. Smokehouses deposited phenolic compounds from burning hardwood directly onto cured meat, blocking bacterial growth at the surface. Lye soap came from hardwood ash and rendered tallow, costing nothing beyond labor. Tallow candles, heirloom seeds saved year to year, hand-loomed cloth from home-raised fiber, medicinal preparations from yarrow, yellow root, and sassafras, none of it purchased, all of it made. The difference is that they understood the mechanism behind each system. The difference is that no alternative existed, which forced genuine mastery. The difference is that this mastery accumulated across generations and passed directly from grandmother to grandchild, right up until the moment an outside economic force made it appear unnecessary, and the chain broke. That is not accident. That is a sequence. Here is something the standard industry account leaves out. The Rural Electrification Administration, pushed federally from 1936 onward, carried electric power to rural Appalachia far later than it reached urban centers. According to the historical record reviewed for this video, well into the mid-20th century, mountain families still relied on root cellars and springhouses simply because no alternative existed. When electrification arrived, it brought no instruction to keep the old system running alongside the new one. It arrived with the refrigerator, the canning company, the commercial seed catalog, and the soap manufacturer. And it arrived into communities already destabilized by the coal company town economy. Regional historians document that the company store model eroded the very skills that workers needed when layoffs came, by making them dependent on purchased goods for everything. The traditional community's own account puts it plainly: industrialization created dependency. Skills were not banned. They ceased to be passed down because the commercial food system made them appear unnecessary at exactly the moment a community had the least capacity to resist. Read that sentence again and ask yourself who exactly was being protected. Now, if you are thinking this only applies to someone with a mountain homestead, a root cellar already dug, and an acre of garden going, stay with me, because this next part is written specifically for you. Here is what a viewer in an existing home can do this weekend, using materials from a standard hardware store or farm supply store with no permits, no contractors, and no special equipment. Fermentation needs a food-grade glass jar or stoneware vessel, running $10 to $30 depending on size, combined with kosher salt at roughly $2 per pound. No heat source is required. Lacto fermentation completes in 1 to 4 weeks. Salt draws moisture out of the vegetable by osmosis, creating a brine, and the lactobacillus bacteria already present lower the pH below the threshold where harmful organisms can survive. A jar, salt, and a vegetable. That is the entire list. A root cellar. Equivalent inside an existing basement requires insulation board cut to line a corner. $30 to $50 at any home improvement store as of 2025. A 4-inch PVC elbow vented to outside air, and a $15 thermometer. Total materials come in under $60. One afternoon of work. That corner should hold between 32 and 40 degrees Fahrenheit through winter, refrigerator temperature, maintained by the earth itself at zero ongoing cost. Leather Britches beans need a needle, cotton thread at roughly $2, and green beans from a garden or farm stand at $1 to $2 per pound in 2025. String the beans, hang them in a warm attic or above a wood stove, and allow 4 to 6 weeks to dry fully. 30 minutes of labor, no electricity, no equipment. A preserved harvest at the end of it. Lye soap takes hardwood ash, which costs nothing, combined with rendered lard or tallow at $3 to $5 per pound from a butcher, and water. One batch produces approximately 6 bars at a total material cost under $5. 2 to 3 hours of work from start to finish. None of these require a permit. None require a contractor. Every material named sits on a shelf at a standard hardware store or farm supply store today. But the technique I promised, the one carrying a specific detail that almost nobody outside the mountain community has ever heard, is the leather Britches method. And the detail that makes it work is not the thread, not the attic, not the drying time. The Foxfire book is where this knowledge first reached a wide audience in print. Edited by Elliot Wigginton and published by Anchor Books and Doubleday in 1972, it documented Appalachian food preservation techniques drawn directly from interviews with mountain community members in Robin County, Georgia, the specific community where Wigginton was teaching high school when the project began. Within its first decade, the book sold more than 9 million copies. Its contents covered preserving vegetables, building smokehouses, curing and smoking hog, making soap, and cooking on an open fireplace, all of it gathered from neighbors interviewed by high school students in the Georgia mountains. One of the most documented contacts in that project was Airy Carpenter, known as Aunt Airy, who demonstrated hog butchering and preservation methods on record. The book exists, fully verifiable, and it carries the clearest published account of what the mountain community did to keep food through winter without a single commercial purchase. Here is what the Foxfire book does not spell out, and what Lucinda Ogle, daughter of Wiley Oakley of the Great Smoky Mountains, confirmed in documented accounts of her grandmother's practice. The leather britches technique only delivers its full result with the right bean. The bean is called the Greasy bean. Sometimes it goes by Lazy Wife, an heirloom pole bean originating in North Carolina. Its pod runs smooth rather than fuzzy, which is where the name comes from. That smooth surface is not aesthetic, it is functional. A fuzzy podded bean dried on thread becomes tough, fibrous, and difficult to rehydrate cleanly. The greasy bean dries into something that rehydrates with a concentrated, rich, almost beef-like depth of flavor that no commercially frozen or canned green bean has ever matched. The flavor comes from the drying process itself, which removes water and intensifies the compounds already present in the pod. Freezing preserves water content. Drying removes it and transforms what remains. Those are two entirely different outcomes wearing the same label. Within the greasy bean family, specific cultivars carry documented provenance. Turkey Craw, Pink Tip Greasy, and Cherokee Greasy are among the most preserved and regionally verified. Each has a slightly different character in flavor and drying time, but all share that smooth pod surface that makes the technique work. Bill Best, founder of the Sustainable Mountain Agriculture Center in Berea, Kentucky, has spent decades collecting and documenting these exact cultivars from elderly Appalachian gardeners, and his work makes clear that the bean selection is not a preference. It is the variable that determines whether the technique succeeds. Organizations like Seed Savers Exchange have since helped bring some of these varieties to a wider audience. But within the mountain community, they still move primarily hand to hand. The greasy bean does not appear on commercial seed racks. It moves hand to hand within the mountain community. That is precisely why most people who attempt leather britches use whatever green bean is available, produce a mediocre result, and conclude the technique is more trouble than it is worth. The technique is not the problem. The bean is the variable that nobody told them about. There is also a deeper origin to this technique that the standard account rarely names. Cherokee food preservation traditions, practiced by the people indigenous to the southern Appalachian region for centuries before European settlement, included air drying of beans and other vegetables as a primary storage method. The leather britches technique that Scots, Irish, and German settlers later adopted and adapted almost certainly passed through that cultural contact. It is not a European import applied to American geography. It is an indigenous preservation method that the mountain community inherited, integrated, and carried forward. The Cherokee Greasy cultivar carries that history in its name. Now here is the honesty. The USDA Complete Guide to Home Canning, revised in 2015 and available free through the National Center for Home Food Preservation at nchfp.uga.edu, say that entity name out loud, the National Center for Home Food Preservation, flags a real concern. Certain older traditional methods, including some open kettle canning approaches and some earlier salt ratios used for meat curing, do not meet current pathogen reduction standards without modification. That is a genuine issue, not a manufactured one. The Appalachian tradition developed these methods in conditions where families consumed what they preserved and lived with the consequences directly. Modern food safety science has since identified specific failure points in some of those older approaches. Air drying, lacto fermentation at adequate salt concentration, and root cellaring all carry strong support from both traditional practice and current food science. The specific ratios for meat curing deserve cross-referencing against the 2015 USDA guide before anyone applies them. The technique is sound. The parameters matter. Know both before starting. Here is something else most people have never connected. This knowledge is not uniquely Appalachian, and it did not originate in America. Air drying of vegetables and legumes carries archaeological support back to approximately 6000 BCE, with evidence from Catalhoyuk, in what is now Turkey, and from Egyptian granary records. Salt curing of meat appears in ancient Chinese records around 3000 BCE in Mesopotamia and in Rome, where the word salary traces back to the Latin word for salt. Lacto fermentation shows up in Korean records from at least 37 BCE and in medieval German practice long before it crossed to Appalachia with Scots, Irish, and German settlers during the 17th and 18th centuries. What the mountain community preserved was not a local invention. It was the accumulated food knowledge of the human species, held intact inside a geography that commercial industry reached later than everywhere else. The difference is geography. The difference is timing. The difference is that isolation, which the mountain community carried as a hardship, became the accidental vault that protected this knowledge, while the rest of the country spent decades buying back into a commercial system costing $6,000 per household per year and producing food discarded at a rate of $728 per person annually. That is what was taken. Not a recipe. A system. The Foxfire Museum in Mountain City, Georgia has spent decades relocating and reconstructing more than 20 historic log cabins and outbuildings from across the northeast Georgia mountain region. The Oak Spring Garden Foundation in Virginia documented a full leather Britches harvest revival in 2020, their chef working through the technique from scratch using the traditional method. Ronnie Lundy, whose cookbook Victuals is considered the definitive modern text on Appalachian food culture, has written extensively about the same preservation systems. Her documentation of how these methods sustained mountain communities across generations adds an important contemporary authority to what the Foxfire interviews established 50 years ago. The Old Farmer's Almanac, updated as of February 2026, notes that root cellars are drawing renewed attention from gardeners, food security advocates, and sustainable living practitioners returning to methods that electric refrigeration rendered invisible for roughly 70 years. The knowledge did not disappear. It waited. One practical resource worth having: the USDA. Complete Guide to Home Canning, revised in 2015, available free at nchfp.uga.edu through the National Center for Home Food Preservation. 170 years of canning research, compiled into a single government document that endorses the same preservation methods Appalachian families used before commercial food processing displaced them. Print it and keep it. It reconciles traditional practice with current safety parameters, and it costs nothing. If you are the kind of person who believes real knowledge gets quietly buried to protect someone else's market share, you already know where the subscribe button is. Next week, the focus turns to the traditional Appalachian building technique that kept mountain homes dry for 100 years before modern waterproofing compounds replaced it. There is one specific material inside that method, a natural compound sourced locally, that appears in only one document I have found, a county extension bulletin from the 1940s. Modern restoration guides leave it out entirely, and that omission is why most attempts at the same repair fail within 5 years. Subscribe so you are there when it arrives. Tell me in the comments what your grandparents preserved and how they did it. Tell me whether the greasy bean is still being grown anywhere near where you live. Every comment gets read. This audience carries knowledge the internet has not cataloged yet. Put it in the comments.